Hi there, traders. This is Brad Gilbert with the FX Market Insight for the 8th of January. All right, we're halfway through the Asian session. There's been very little activity as expected, as there's no major releases. We did have the Aussie trade balance figures out, but once again, trade balance numbers are not a big economic consequence. Right? It's more of a result. So don't get too caught up in that. The numbers were slightly weaker, but the Aussie, as you can see, is hardly doing too much there at all. So there's a general lack of interest in the Aussie and even the Kiwi for that matter. It's just sort of dribbling lower, which is a little bit of a surprise because once I show you the dollar China, we are starting to see it weaken a lot. So I'm surprised these things aren't a little bit lower, I should say. Dollar yen, as you can see, is stuck in the middle of the range after that big washout last week. Euro did tap to the top side there, 114.80, just above that, but it's just sort of drifting back into the range, which is a little bit of a surprise because the dollar index is lower and the dollar pairs are drifting lower across the board. Sterling slightly higher, but once again, this thing is really waiting for the Brexit stuff, and most traders are sitting on the sidelines. Dollar CAD, if anything, was the one pair yesterday that sort of where the charts make a little bit of sense. Oil rallying, which is sort of stalled at the moment around 48.5. We did see a clean out of stops under 133.50. It's probably gone a little bit further than I thought, and that was probably the best technical trade that we were looking at yesterday. So just coming across here, let me just give you a look at what I was talking about with the offshore yuan. Now, this puppy, I mean, it has been moving around. Obviously, you would have thought it would be a lot lower with the China rallying, as these potential trade issues with the US being sorted out. I think one of the secretaries of state or some lunatic in the US was talking about they could see a deal coming through. You'd expect the dollar yuan, to be lower. That's China rallying because that would be the major benefit. Equity markets, well, across obviously the US equities and most of the Asian equities, a little bit positive, but China is a little bit weaker. So there's obviously a few things coming out there which are rocking the boat, unsettling the markets. Dollar index, as you can see here, it's not a major move, but it does show you that the dollar index itself is drifting lower down through 95.80. It's also broken down on the daily charts as well. And that's why I've gone to a pretty bearish stance on the US dollar. I was going to say slightly bearish stance, but it's actually a bearish stance in itself. Let me just come back before I show you that. Let me just give you the sort of major news. Now, as you'd expect, there's no major news out at the moment because there's been nothing major sort of happening. So, dollar eases in Asian trade on expectations of Fed pause. Well, once again, that's like yesterday's news. If they don't have anything new to tell you, they'll hash yesterday's news and give you some of that. And they're sort of talking about, well, dollar CAD's lower or the CAD is higher on bets. The Bank of Canada will keep neutral targets. So don't forget the Bank of Canada due Wednesday. It's going to be probably the premier event of the week with no potential change in rates. But if they're moving to a neutral stance, well, then that could be a good thing. I think they've been all over the shop, the Central Bank of Canada, because of the ongoing issues with oil, with NAFTA. You're trying to manage the US geopolitical situation with Trump. It's been a bit of a nightmare. So that's what we're sort of looking at there. This could be a reason why, you're looking at dollar China sort of not really moving too high. FX reserves fall. That's what probably Trump's waiting to see. And as you can see here, still in gains before parliamentary debate. And that's where we are at the moment. So if I come back across and just give you a look at the my FX trading hub, and this is what I sort of really focus on. Now, of course, there's been no major changes in the last 24 hours. So when I'm looking at the market, I'm like, well, okay, the markets are back at full liquidity now, right? So the chance of some random 200 or 300 point move like we saw last week in holiday markets is unlikely unless it's a real event. Upcoming releases, well, we don't have a huge amount on the cards straight away. Euro, well, German industrial production numbers are probably the only real go-to at this point. Definitely worth having a look at. And then as we go into Wednesday, you're going to be coming down to the much bigger events, and it starts with the Bank of Canada interest rate decision. Now, major currency pair outlook. if you notice here, the dollar index has broken down. And as I said, if you click on these arrows or the heading there, the US dollar index, you'll see that it'll give you a bit more detail around the technical perspective. The dollar index is broken down on the hourlies and dailies. Dollar yen, well, it is a fact that it is still lower after that big glitch, but it is starting to trade sideways. To me, still a mildly bearish outlook. Dollar CAD, well, it's broken down on the hourlies and the dailies. No major fundamental driver, so that's why it's mildly bearish. And dollar Swiss is just drifting lower with the dollar index itself, but it hasn't really gone too far like the dollar index. And funnily enough, well, I shouldn't actually really say funnily enough, the bottom pairs here, which is where a lot of action is, these currencies are sitting waiting, right? There's no specific direction. The hourly charts are moving up and down, but, you know, medium to long term, there's been no major changes there. And that's why these currencies aren't doing a lot. And that's why they aren't moving at the moment. Most traders are out there are looking at their charts, and after last week, they're still trying to work out what the hell is going on. So when you're looking at your charts, you know, there's no real clear direction there on the Aussie at this moment. Well, short term, yeah, it's going up, but what we're looking for is really strong direction that you can trade with. And as you can see, the Kiwi is a good example here of a currency pair that lacks momentum. Looks like a few stop losses triggered on the Kiwi on the top side, and it's just drifting back into the range. Dollar yen, not really doing a hell of a lot. Euro was the potential little false break here back into the range. That's quite interesting, but Euro has been trading sideways for the last 3 or 4 months. Sterling, well, it's edging higher. The market's short. I mean, well, has been short for some time. So now, as we get closer to Brexit, we may see that sort of squeeze higher, or once you get a random announcement, it could go anywhere. Once again, dollar CAD, technically it's breaking down. If oil continues to rally and move towards $50, well, then we might see it lower. But don't forget, we've got the Bank of Canada tomorrow. So for me, when I'm looking at the potential opportunities today, there isn't a hell of a lot, okay? I'm looking at the potential German data as a bit of an instigation of a trade, but Euro lacks clear direction. So, you know what? It's one of those times where you just got to sit tight, wait for the major momentum to pick up on these currencies, and it will come from these events, right? This is where the action is. So make sure you keep an eye on the upcoming releases, because that's where the guys at the banks, that's what they're waiting for, right? They sit there every day over a year or 2 years. They're waiting for specific opportunities to hit the currencies when they know what's happening. At the moment, we don't have that, so we just got to sit tight. All right, guys, that's it from me. I'll see you in the live trade zone. Just to give you a bit of an update as well, I have adjusted the 247 trade zone. I did take out the funded trader chat. We've merged that with the 247 trade zone now that everyone's part of the pretty much part of the overall funded trader program itself. All right, that's it from me, guys. I'll see you in the 247 trade zone. Have a good trade day. Cheerio.